Pretty sure Vice Chair Birch is planning to attend, so. All right. Good evening. The Town of Gatos Planning Commission of Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021 is now called to order. This meeting is being conducted using teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with the State of California Executive Order N29-20, dated March 17, 2020, regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. The live stream of the meeting may be viewed on Comcast Channel 15 and/or online as noted on the agenda. In accordance with the order, the public may only view the meeting on television or online and may not view it in the council chambers. We are conducting tonight's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. All planning commissioners and staff are participating from remote locations. All voting will be conducted by roll call vote. Director Paulson, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Commissioner Barnett.
Present.
Commissioner Tavana.
Here.
Commissioner Suzuki.
Here.
Commissioner Hanson.
Here.
And Chair Janoff.
Present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that currently Vice Chair Birch and Commissioner Thomas are not with us.
All right, thank you. As the Planning Commission conducts this meeting on behalf of the Town Council and residents of Los Gatos, we encourage active participation, which is essential for democracy and critical to the work of the Planning Commission. Your participation can occur through written comments about agenda items submitted to staff prior to a meeting. These are always welcome and very helpful. During our meeting, there are two opportunities for members of the public to participate. During the verbal communications period, an individual may speak on any topic not on the agenda. And during the hearing is on a specific agenda item, any member of the public who may wish to speak about that item may do so when called. If you wish to address the commission tonight during verbal communication period or during consideration of an item, you must join the Zoom webinar via the link and password provided on page 2 of the staff report. When I announce the item for which you wish to speak, please click the raise hand feature in Zoom. If you're participating by phone only, press *9 on your telephone keypad. When called to speak, please state your name and address for the record. You may choose to speak anonymously, and it is requested that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. We've now come to the verbal communications portion of our agenda. At this time, members of the public are invited to address the commission on any issue not on the agenda. Director Paulson, do we have anyone wishing to speak at this time?
We do, and also let the record reflect that Vice Chair Birch has joined us. The first speaker will be Nancy.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Nancy Knight. I'm at 308 Harding Avenue in Los Gatos. I'm one of the appellants on the 17200 Los Robles lot line appeal meeting that we had 2 weeks ago. And I'd like to get some clarity on the town's obligation to adhere to its ordinances as it relates to lot mergers. The California Subdivision Map Act states that a local agency, in this case the town of Los Gatos, has the option to create a local ordinance relating to parcel mergers as long as the town ordinance complies with the tenets of the state's SMA. Some time ago, the town of Los Gatos made the decision to include a lot merger ordinance in its own zoning regulations. Here's what the California SMA says. Subdivision Maps Act 66-451.11 specifies that a local agency may, by ordinance which conforms to and implements the procedures prescribed by the article, provide for the merger of a parcel or unit with a contiguous parcel or unit held by the same owner if any one of the contiguous parcels or units held by the same owner does not conform to standards for minimum parcel size under the zoning ordinance of the local agency applicable to the parcel or units of land, and if all of the following requirements are satisfied. It goes on to list 8 requirements, one of them being B5, that says there must be legal access which is adequate for vehicular and safety equipment access and maneuverability. So the town is permitted to have a lot merger ordinance as long as it's compliant with state law. And our town created ordinance number 29.10.70 to address lot mergers, and it clearly states, and I quote, "Any parcels under the same or substantially same ownership that do not meet the criteria listed above shall be considered merged. In addition, no parcel shall be modified through a lot line adjustment procedure in order to meet the criteria listed above. In our last meeting, we clearly established the fact that parcel 2 is landlocked. It does not meet the B5 criteria for legal access for vehicular or emergency services. It's important to note that per the standard evidence code for the state of California, the word shall is mandatory, whereas the word may is permissive. So when the town ordinance states shall and the subdivision map act states may, why is it that the town is not abiding by its own ordinance for lot mergers, given that APN 532-36-077 has no legal access? Can Mr. Paulson please address my question?
Ms. Neep, at this time, we are permitted to take comments, but not engage in conversation or discussion. But you're more than welcome to take your concerns up with staff, contact staff, and schedule a meeting to discuss the matter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Paulson, do we have anyone else wishing to speak?
Yes, 1 second. Next speaker will be Allison.
Okay, hello, this is Alison Steer, 304 Harding Ave, Los Gatos. So good evening. I'd like to provide some feedback on the 17200 Los Robos Way lot line adjustment appeal meeting held 2 weeks ago. While we appreciated the thoughtful commentary and questioning, the appellants felt the Planning Commission was misdirected with regard to the lot merger ordinance and permissions afforded by the SMA. Those listening to the appeal meeting were very surprised the town did not defend their own ordinance, especially when it contains the words shall, which per the standard evidence code for the state of California is a mandatory term. Per our town attorney in the California Civil Section Code 1093, legal merger of 2 parcels can occur either through the express written statement of the grantor or through a local agency's compliance with the merger procedures contained in section 6645.110 and 11 of the SMA, including the due process requirements contained therein. And just because lots have not been merged procedurally, the town ordinance still would not allow the use of the LLA procedure. I also shared with Mr. Paulson and the town attorney the Napa County Superior Court ruling for Sierra Club versus Napa County on sequential lot line adjustment. You can request a highlighted copy from Ryan Safety as it is included in our appeal packet to the town council. Let me read a couple of key statements from this ruling. When local municipalities regulate areas over which they traditionally have exercised control, our courts presume, absent a clear preemptive intent from the legislature, that such regulation is not preempted by state law. However, we do not divine an intent to bring all sequential lot line adjustments within the MAP Act's ambit. The ordinance does not allow an endless stream of lots to be adjusted at one time, nor does it allow a non-buildable parcel become buildable through the adjustment process. Finally, I'd like to comment on the seeker findings and the use of the common sense exemption for the Exhibit 2 you're about to approve tonight. Note that Class 5 categorical exemption, minor alterations and land use limitations can't be used because this only applies to lot line adjustments for land with average slopes less than 20% and which does not result in any changes to land use or density. The common sense exemption states where it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the activity in question will have a significant effect on the environment. The activity is not subject to seeker. Then it goes on to ask the Planning Commission to make affirmative findings. The site is physically suitable for the type of development and for the proposed density of development. Subdivision and the proposed improvements are not likely to cause substantial environmental damage, nor substantially or avoidably injure fish or wildlife or the habitat. I asked the Planning Commission, how can you make these required findings on the suitability of the development if there is no development proposed? And put the town is not subject to seeker for this very reason. And how these affirmative findings will tie your hands when this comes back for planning review in the future. Is this a situation where the developer is trying to skirt around his obligation to comply with seeker by using the lot line adjustment procedure? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Does anyone have a question for Ms. Steer at this time? I don't see any hands raised. Mr. Paulson, are there any other speakers who wish to speak now?
So again, we are at the verbal communication, so items that are not on the agenda. Would anyone else wish to speak? I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
All right, then we'll continue on. The next item on our agenda is the consent calendar. The consent item to be acted upon in a single motion is approval of draft minutes of the September 25, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Does any commission member or member of the public wish to pull the item from the consent calendar? I don't see any hands raised. Seeing none, may I have a motion for approval of the consent calendar? Commissioner Hanson.
I move that we approve the consent calendar, which consists of the minutes from our last meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Commissioner Barnett.
Second the motion.
Thank you. Any comments or questions before I call the vote? All right, so we'll take a roll call vote at this time. Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Tavano,
Yes.
Commissioner Barnett,
Yes.
Commissioner Suzuki,
Yes.
Vice Chair Birch,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. The motion passes. So we now move on to the public hearing, agenda item number 2. This is requesting approval for modification to an existing architecture and site application S-19-016 to modify the conditions of approval on property zoned R18 APN 532-36049, architecture and site application S21-025, located at 244 Harding Avenue, property owner Marcus Thordahl, applicant Henry Riggs, and project planner Jocelyn Schutman. Sorry. Are there any disclosures tonight? I don't see any hands raised. And by show of hands, will the commissioners indicate that they have personally viewed this property? All right, thank you. I understand, Ms. Schutman, you'll be giving the staff report tonight.
That's correct. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. Before you is a request for a modification to an existing architecture and site application to modify the conditions of approval. An architecture and site application for a new second-story addition to an existing single-family home and a grading permit for site improvements were approved by the Development Review Committee on March 21st of 2017, with the conditions of approval that are contained in Exhibit 6. The architecture and site application expired as the approval was not vested pursuant to town code. A new architecture and site application was submitted, and the Development Review Committee approved this application on April 30th, 2019, with the conditions of approval that are contained in Exhibit 7. A subsequent building permit was issued in June of 2019, and a grading permit was issued in July of 2019. The applicant has now submitted a new architecture and site application requesting to modify Condition 44, which requires public frontage improvements pursuant to Town Standard Plan 201 for a detached sidewalk with a planter strip to an attached sidewalk with no planter strip. Condition 44 was contained in each of the approved set of conditions of approval, and this can be found in Exhibits 3, 6, and 7 of your packet this evening. Based on the analysis in the staff report, staff recommends denial of the requested modification. There was also an addendum that has been circulated to the commission with additional public comments that were received after the distribution of the staff report and additional information that's been provided from the applicant. This concludes staff's presentation. However, we are available for any questions along with staff from the Parks and Public Works Department.
All right, thank you, Ms. Schutman, for your report. Do any commissioners have questions for Ms. Schutman or staff at this time? Commissioner Hanson.
I have a question for Parks and Public Works. I saw the comments in the staff report about the reasons for adhering to the town standard for this particular parcel, and relative to the surrounding parcels on that side of the street, that there was a comment about if they came up for discretionary approval, they were trying to do that. So I wanted to kind of ask a little bit more about that, which is, we're in a situation where this whole entire side of the street is not in compliance with the town standard. And so how would this evolve over, say, the next 5 years, where we would have, if approved, one parcel that had the compliance with town standards, and then the other ones on the same side of the street did not?
Yeah, Mike Weiss, Senior Civil Engineer. As we receive these applications, the development applications, the same standards would be applied to those nearby adjacent parcels. So incrementally, if they were to come in for an addition to a house with a grading permit that would require an A&S application, then they would be required per the conditions of approval to do the same to meet the current town standards. So that's how it would incrementally progress down the street. I will mention that there are also a series of properties further down Harding towards Los Gatos Boulevard, I think 5 or 6 in, as you come eastward from Los Gatos Boulevard, that do have a planter strip as well. So there is a segment of Harding that does not currently have these improvements.
Okay, and then just to follow up though, does that include the parcels that have no sidewalk at all right now?
Yes, yeah. So in looking through our permitting system, there aren't any other other properties along Harding that have had the A&S application process. And so without that discretionary approval, these conditions haven't been applied to building permits or other types of permits that don't go through that process.
And then last and final question, if none of these people came for a request for a modification that required discretionary approval, this could go on for as long as that happened. Is that correct?
Yeah, there could be the chance that someone decides to do it on their own accord and put the improvements in on their own. But usually this does occur as development applications are received and implemented upon the approval of those applications.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioners have questions for staff? I do have one. I'm not sure if this is for Mr. Weitz or other. In reading item number 44 in the conditions of approval, I understand what it says, but it doesn't refer to the ST-201 specifically. So my question is, how do you communicate to homeowners what the expectation is for that sidewalk development if the specific plan that you're referring to isn't in the conditions of approval?
There are other applications in where we make it more expressly described as to what's required. But I will mention that this application from the first submittal back in 2016 through the entire permitting process did show this detached sidewalk as part of their plans. It was part of the application process from the beginning through all the way. So this was displayed and illustrated on their plans throughout the process, the detached sidewalk with the planter strip.
So you're saying that there was an understanding, a common understanding of the expectation going back.
That is my interpretation. I was not the project engineer on this at that time, but that goes to support the fact that this is an engineering standard, that this would be approved across the board and still be held to be a standard and a required improvement.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Barnett. You're on mute.
There we go. Sorry for that. There's 2 architectural and site applications that are discussed in the staff report. I just want to make sure that we're talking about the right one. And is that S16068 or S19016?
So there are multiple numbers. S16 was the original one. Then that one unfortunately expired and they had to apply for a new architecture and site application. That was under S19016. And then the architecture and site application you have now, the S21, is for the requested modification.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. So at this time, we'll move on and invite the applicant to make a presentation. The applicant would have to have up to 5 minutes to address the commission.
Thank you. I will now allow the property owner to speak. You can unmute yourself. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Can I please ask for the slides to be presented? Excellent. So good evening, everyone. My name is Marcus, and I want to thank the Commission for this opportunity to present why we're applying for this modification to the sidewalk layout. And if there's one single thing I can ask of you tonight, it is to apply common sense measures as we go through this. Let's go to the next slide. We're a family of 4, and I promised my youngest daughter, Maya, to mention we have both a dog and a turtle. But apart from that, we've been living at 244 Harding Avenue for 11 years. As we go to the next slide, please. And we really love Los Gatos for the friendly atmosphere, nested in nature, and even more importantly, the local community. As a matter of fact, it was really because of conversations with more than 30 neighbors about the sidewalk in the past 8 months that we decided to file for this modification, as every single one said that continuing this existing sidewalk is really the only layout that makes sense for a sidewalk that simply ends after our house and is where the lot is sloped. If you notice, there's nowhere else on the street where there is a sloped lot and then there is a sidewalk with a detached planter strip. Now, I want to emphasize that I'm all for installing a sidewalk and development and progress in general. And I do understand the need for standards and rules. I use them every day in my job. While at the same time, it is equally important to apply judgment when the premises are very different from the assumptions upon which a standard may be defined. Now, as we go through these slides, I want to ask you to really focus on the objective of providing the best fitting sidewalk to the location. And if we go to the next slide, please. Continuing the existing layout is really what makes the most sense to us and every neighbor in the community with whom I've discussed this. We can look at this from many angles and compare. First of all, how well the sidewalk blends in and the impact it has on the natural environment, the visual quality and cohesiveness with the existing. As we go to the next slide, please. Secondly, the complications involved with excavating the slope and extending the street level further into the hill, which will require redoing the gas main line, the water line, the sewage pipeline. And in addition to that, the driveway slope will now be over 40%, which means additional excavation of the driveway to extend the ramp and bring the slope down to 20%. And then third, of course, the resources, both natural and monetary, to spend to build the sidewalk, depending on the layout. Next slide, please. When in essence, the objective is simply to provide a sidewalk for the community to use to the benefit of everybody. So my ask is truly for your judgment as you evaluate this modification application so we can build the best fitting sidewalk to the conditions. I believe that's in the best interest of everybody in this meeting tonight. I'm open to any questions, as well as we can do a couple more slides and walk further down the street. And you will see that because we have a slope on the left side of the street in this direction, please go to the next slide and the one after that, you will see that there is no sidewalk. And once we get down to where there is a detached sidewalk, the planter strip is 2 foot wide. It's very small planter strip. And in all honesty, I don't really see how the sidewalk will benefit from this. And if we go back to the town engineer Mike's comment about if others have an ANS application, therefore will be required to put in a sidewalk, let's say my neighbors in 246 and 248, then they will have to comply with this standard. So now I have a sidewalk that turns into the bank, and then it will be a little bit of a strip where it's straight, and then it will turn in again when they have to redo it. I don't really see how that is going to benefit anyone. So with that, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thordal, for your comments. Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant at this time? Commissioner Suzuki.
Hello. I heard you mention the phrase impact on the natural environment multiple times. Can you elaborate what that means precisely?
Yeah, so, I've grown up with a lot of respect for natural resources around me. And obviously it's not shown in this part of the application, but we did a big effort in putting in solar cells on the house and designing it in a way so it actually doesn't need any air conditioning, even on the hottest days, by making sure that there's natural airflow. And I can tell you that the house today is basically like a net zero house. because of the solar cells compared to the energy we consume. And in the same way, by doing unnecessary excavation, I think that is a waste of natural resources. The engines that excavate, they burn gasoline. And what are you going to do with the dirt? You're just going to throw it somewhere else. And once you've excavated, then you increase water runoff on that slope, etc. In all honesty, for no true purpose, it doesn't provide any additional value, in my opinion. And if we look at the name planter strip, that means we're going to plant something. We're in the middle of a drought, a continuous drought, I would say. And so what are we going to do with that? Are we going to continue to water that the next 10, 20 years, 30 years? To me, that doesn't really make much sense. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanson.
Although this doesn't address all the points in your presentation, one of the tenets of your presentation was building a 5-foot retaining wall. And in the staff report, our Parks and Public Works staff had indicated that that's not necessary, that you could do two different, I believe it was 2 different retaining walls stepping up. And so had you considered that? And if not, why?
Yeah, so I will admit that when I saw that in the report, I don't recall we've ever discussed that. And I discussed it with Henry, our architect as well, that, when you do a step like that on a steep slope, you actually end up excavating even more. If we can, please hand it over to Henry. He can comment more on that.
I don't know if that's allowed, Chair.
Yeah, that's not allowed at this time, but perhaps when you come back.
Okay. But so if you think about it, when you do stepwise, instead of doing a single wall on a steep slope, you actually end up excavating even more to provide the same results. So I don't see how that is beneficial, to be honest, with the perspective of conserving resources and fitting into the natural environment.
Okay, I think you answered my question. And if we have the opportunity after public comments, when you come back for closing testimony, maybe we can talk to your architect.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Commissioner Barnett.
Thank you. Mr. Thordal, I think you touched on this in your presentation, but the question comes to my mind: if one of your neighbors does have to meet an architectural and site requirement that requires a parking strip, would it still be your position that it doesn't fit into the neighborhood? That your own property should be exempt?
So my opinion is that if you look at where we have these parking strips, not only on this street, but also other streets in Los Gatos, you will notice that they're dominantly placed where you don't have any slope. You can go pretty much everywhere in the town, and you're not going to see that tall walls are put in order to provide a planter strip. There may be one sidewalk here or there where there is a wall and there's still a planter strip, but it was the only way to put in a sidewalk. But otherwise, if you think about it, if every time we had to put in a sidewalk, we had to excavate a lot, then we would probably create another standard.
All right, thank you for that. I don't see any other hands raised. So at this time, we'll move on to public comments. Members of the public may choose to state your name and/or address, or you may speak anonymously, but please understand that this meeting is being recorded for the public record. And again, we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Director Paulson, do we have any members of the public who wish to speak at this time?
Yes, hello. Yeah, you've got me, Joel.
Yes, Allison will be first to speak.
Okay, believe it or not, I'm Marcus's neighbor. And that's one of the reasons I'm here tonight. I live right around the corner from Marcus. My 6.5-year-old son loves to ride his bike around the neighborhood, and we walk together to Louise Van Meter School past his house. I just have a question because, when I look at the way the town is asking him to lay out the pavement, you're going to have to, walk along, turn a little bit left, walk along, and then, get off, and then walk across the street. If I go down further to 234 Harding Ave, which was recently built in, for 2019, it was sold. It's a beautiful house. It doesn't have a planter strip. So I was just wondering, is there a reason why when that was developed, and I see you're going to look it up, but why you didn't ask them to put a planter strip in?
All right, thank you. And again, Ms. Deere, we are not able to answer questions at this time, but your question is noted.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who would wish to speak?
There are. 1 second, Chair. Next speaker will be Bill.
So this is Bill Ellers. I live at 544 University Avenue. I'm on the Complete Streets Transportation Commission meeting. I'm here as a citizen. I'd like to encourage the commission to consider diversity in our town. It's an overarching goal of the town council. So having a square layout with flat sidewalks, looking exactly the same as every other house on a street that has not typical streets. We don't have a flat layout with square blocks and no slopes. We have diversity. We have hillsides. We have sidewalks that don't always go perfectly, and that's part of the charm of Los Gatos. I'd also point out that there's going to be improvements to Shannon Road. The town is going to install sidewalks probably along blocks and blocks of Shannon between Cherry Blossom and Los Gatos Boulevard. There's no sidewalks on those streets, yet the town will be paying for those. They're not forcing the residents to pay for sidewalks that don't exist. So it doesn't seem fair to have the homeowners always pay for improvements that are dictated by town and perhaps some arbitrary standards that don't apply or are very tough to apply to slope lots. So I support Mr. Thordahl and encourage you to approve his appeal. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Eller. Any commissioners have questions for the speaker? I don't see any hands raised. Dr. Paulson?
Yes, next will be Terry.
Hi, my name is Terry Reinhardt. My address is 110 Wooster Loop. I too am around the corner from Marcus, and I'm just curious of how many of you have actually walked by the property or seen the property firsthand, because I think if you were able to look at it and see it firsthand, you'd have a whole different opinion. Marcus's slides were great, but having that planter strip in there just doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever if you actually look at the property. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Ms. Reinhardt. And I would just like to state that at the beginning of this item, we did show hands of commissioners who have personally visited the property. So that has been done. Do we have any other speakers, Dr. Paulson?
Let me check. 1 second. Yes, the next speaker will be Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle Totis. I live in the greater neighborhood where Marcus's home is, and I do walk my dog a lot around the neighborhood. Most of that neighborhood is not sidewalked. I do want to point that out to the commission. And I think if the commission feels that the neighborhood should have sidewalks, as we're hearing about Shannon and Cherrystone, then maybe the town should approach this with a different view. I think putting the onus on one homeowner piece of sidewalk, which is 20 feet long or so, is a little bit situation when the houses on one side don't have it. So I think that perhaps the commission should approach this with a broader view and spend time looking at the neighborhood and what the neighborhood really wants to further the goals of access and enjoyment. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Paulson, do we have any other individuals who wish to speak at this time?
Let me take a quick peek. I don't see any other hands raised from members of the public to speak, Chair.
All right, thank you. So at this time, we will ask the applicant to return, and you'll have up to 3 minutes to add any further comments if you wish to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure if there are any additional questions for me. I do want to emphasize, I understand that there are apparently other places where the town puts in sidewalk on their own. Having that said, I've understood from the beginning that I had to put a sidewalk in. I will admit that when I realized what the layout was, I was actually surprised. I had not really paid attention to it originally as we submitted the plans and went through that. There were many other things happening in our family and overall, but I'm looking forward to answer any additional questions or if there are other things you want to touch on. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Hanson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Thordahl. You had indicated your architect was present. I think I see him in the attendees. And so if he could comment on the thing that we discussed earlier, which was the town's assertion that that you could do a 2-tiered retaining wall versus the 5-foot retaining wall, and what impact that would have on the project.
Through the chair, would you like me to speak?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Henry Riggs. I am the architect for the project and have been involved for about, I guess, 4 years on this project, a rather extensive effort to get through the overall process. And we've been very pleased with the result in many ways. I am embarrassed to say I have to agree with Mr. Thordahl that we did not put sufficient emphasis into looking at the sidewalk requirement. To be honest, with 4 years of hurdles to get through the process, we were just so glad to get a permit. And we felt that it would work out in some way. It became evident, however, that actually rather challenging even to the town's ordinance regarding retaining walls and modifications to the hillside, that installing this sidewalk set back from the curb for an additional planting strip was a rather dramatic change to the frontage of the property and therefore to the street front. When we realized that it would be a 5-foot retaining wall, we, of course, wanted to come back and ask if this was really what the town wanted. So we do understand, of course, that there have to be standards, and the standards are most useful to apply to general conditions and the most common applications. Occasionally there are exceptions, and of course Los Gatos in its wisdom has set up the alternative to address exceptional circumstances by coming to the Planning Commission and asking for your judgment above and beyond a one-size-fits-all standard. And then to your specific question, Commissioner Hanson, if the retaining wall at the front of a slope is required to be 5 feet and you terrace it, it does not remain 5 feet. If the slope, for example, is a foot of rise for 2 feet of moving backwards, if you terraced even just a 2-foot strip, you would add another foot to the total retaining wall. There's actually a situation where if you try to maintain a 2-to-1 ratio, but you're on a 2-to-1 slope, you could continue to build retaining walls all the way up to the house without ever actually achieving additional setback. You would still, in other words, have the 5 foot at the front. So we did consider that some time ago and dismissed it right away.
Okay, I think you answered my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. And since Henry Riggs, Mr. Riggs, you are on behalf of the applicant, do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant at this time? All right, I don't see any hands raised. So I will now close the public hearing on this item and ask if commissioners have any questions of staff, wish to comment on the application, or introduce a motion for consideration. Commissioner Thomas, and then Commissioner Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to ask staff to describe what the safest option is for this sidewalk layout. And then I do have one additional question after that.
Yeah, neither option is perceived to be unsafe. It's just a matter of meeting town engineering design standards and town standard plans as they're applicable in this instance.
Okay, thank you. To my understanding, the original reason that this was passed was because having a strip makes it more, having a strip of vegetation as a barrier between the sidewalk and the road is more safe. So I was just wondering if that was deemed true, because a lot of the public comments that we got were about safety and walking. And that's what I thought that was the strip with vegetation provided more of a barrier. But,
I apologize. I thought you were talking about construction wise, but yeah, from a pedestrian perspective, having that vegetation buffer between the curb and the sidewalk provides a better and safer alternative for pedestrian usage. I thought you were talking excavation.
About the walls. Okay, yeah. You're like, all the options that they're gonna do are safe. Don't worry. Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you. And then, my other question was for staff, if any improvements are made to the to 246 or 248 Harding, under what circumstances would they be required to also improve their sidewalk in a similar manner?
They would need to apply for a discretionary permit, basically go through the same architecture and site application process or development review process.
Okay. So if we made an exception tonight, then that opens the door for multiple exceptions into the future. Can staff or maybe another planning commissioner?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one.
Okay.
We've determined through many years of work from the Planning Commission that no one instance, no one decision sets a precedent. Each case comes before us de novo, and it stands on its own.
Okay. So I guess my follow-up to that is that under what circumstances are we allowed to really take into account that the neighbor, that 246 and 248 don't have this type of sidewalk? Because I'm hearing that that's a concern, that it's not congruent with the rest of the neighborhood, and pedestrians and people that are driving by are concerned about that. But it seems that the goal of the overall, this rule change in general, is to continue to improve as improvements come along and as new site applications come along, that this is a continual improvement in town, throughout town.
So Commissioner Thomas, I don't hear a question in your statement. It's more of
sorry, that's more for a discussion. Yeah, I guess my question would just be for the other commissioners, so we can wait until we're done with this.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Barnett.
I had a similar question to Ms. Thomas, but this is for staff. Are you aware of any incident where a parking strip prevented personal injury to a pedestrian?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I would have to coordinate with our traffic engineer to see if those records are available. It just, through evaluating it, it looks as though at least the curb would have more chance of clearing and have that additional area from just a logistical standpoint, but I wouldn't have any data directly in front of me on this one.
Commissioner Hanson.
I think I asked about this earlier, but I wanted to ask it again. So I understand about 246 and 248, the properties on the other side where they don't have a sidewalk. What is the plan from Parks and Public Works perspective for them?
If we were to receive a hypothetical, theoretical development application for those properties, the same standards would be applied to those properties as well.
So if I were to state your vision for that side of the street, it would be to have everything on that side of the street have a sidewalk with a planting strip. Is that correct?
Yeah, as those applications would come in, there are those two properties. I believe it's a flag lot and just a regular lot that has just the attached sidewalk. And then the rest of the neighborhood around the corner towards the south has that detached sidewalk. So if those properties were to come in, given the evaluation of the existing conditions, the right-of-way width, the surrounding neighborhood, and our town standards, they would be required in a hypothetical standpoint to construct the same improvements.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Discussion points? Commissioner Suzuki.
Would having an attached sidewalk be substantially more dangerous than having a detached one, at least for this particular property?
I don't believe it could be quantified as to how safe or unsafe one is versus the other. The predominant evaluation on this was whether the proposed improvements meet the town standards, and also with an eye towards the current town standards, also focusing on additional pedestrian safety. I don't have any data as to whether removing a parking strip would significantly affect pedestrian safety. But this is more of an evaluation based on what the standards, engineering design standards, standard plans call for. Specifically on this street, this type of street is a collector street. Our engineering design standards specifically call out for the construction of a planter strip with sidewalk in these types of these streets. So that's more of the focus of this evaluation with the current conditions, existing conditions, and this proposed application.
Commissioner Tabano.
Yeah, just a simple question, pretty straightforward here. So why does 246 and 248 have a attached sidewalk and not detached? Because it does look, as I walk the area, and I'm pretty familiar here, that this does seem somewhat new. And as you go down towards, I guess, I forget what that leads into, but it is detached down the street there. Do you have any history you can provide on that?
I'm not aware of the reasoning as to why it doesn't have detached sidewalk. As it could have been applied in a different time when standards weren't the same. But I would have to look more into why that would be and why that was the case.
Chair, if I might add a little bit here, Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. Sort of big picture, the reason why we've moved to a standard that has the detached sidewalks and sidewalks with a buffer is really for twofold. One is it is a safer environment. It provides that extra buffer between vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic, and in addition, it provides a more comfortable environment for pedestrians. So they're separated from vehicles, and so people are more apt to walk when they're in a more comfortable environment. So they've got a little bit more space, that extra buffer. That provides that feeling of safety and encourages the pedestrians to use the sidewalks to be out there. That's the town of Los Gatos, as you know, grew up over a long period of time. The standards weren't always the same, and so things have evolved and continue to get better over time, hopefully. And the sidewalk with a buffer between the sidewalk and the street is really a new element from that perspective. And that's not to mention the environmental benefits from having an area for water to percolate into the soil. So that's sort of the big picture why we're moving towards the separated sidewalk, that new look. In that neighborhood, directly across the street, there's a significant number of properties that do have that constructed. And then for all future development, we sort of need to start somewhere. So we where it makes sense, we'd like to do individual residences one at a time and add in the more beneficial separated sidewalks. So that's the big picture why we do it. There are situations where we don't require it, this particular one made sense to us, and so the requirement held.
All right, any other questions? Commissioner Devon.
I didn't have a question, more so just a comment, just looking at these pictures. So, you go from a detached sidewalk to 2 properties with an attached sidewalk. We're asking this applicant to have a detached sidewalk, and then it leads into no sidewalk. So I don't know if, in general speaking, if this is, the right makes sense property to start with. I think it'll stick out like a sore thumb if they were to go through it tonight. So I'm looking for guidance from my fellow commissioners here of what their general thoughts are on this project.
I had a similar observation. When you look at the property, I guess it's the one beyond, two houses away, where you've got the detached sidewalk, and then it turns into the attached sidewalk. So you've got precedent for making a turn, but you also have an opportunity to make that turn a little bit worse. Think about little kids on bikes, to have to navigate that turn and then navigate another turn to make the applicant property a conforming detached sidewalk. So from an ease of use standpoint, I would think that the straight attached sidewalk makes more sense. Yes, Commissioner Hanson.
Oh, if you had more to say, I was just letting you know I want to speak after.
More to say.
Okay. So I did want to comment on the application. While I am totally in support of the town's goals and standards and implementing them, I think in this particular case, this is sort of a one-off situation, and what I'm concerned about is, well, first of all, it's very onerous for the applicant to comply with the standard, and they're more than willing to do at least some sidewalk similar to what's at 246 and 248, which would be better than it is today. And then we still have the rest of that side of the street to deal with. And so I have the concern that if we were to enforce this and make them do this, it could sit for 5, 10 or more years before someone comes and does a discretionary approval on that side of the street. And so to make it consistent, even though the other side of the street is that way, I think it's better for the situation at hand to look at them doing a sidewalk similar to 246 and 248 in this particular case, knowing that if those guys come for approval in the future, that it will be considered a standalone approval and not with this as precedent. But right now, it could sit like this for many, many years, and then it would stick out and not be the same as the rest of the street.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to note that the sidewalk being proposed with this modification is 6 foot width, which is wider than the town guidelines. So it is a fairly good sized walkway. Any other comments? Commissioner Thomas.
I hear what Commissioner Hanson is saying, and that's why I brought up a similar question earlier, but my concern is, like, I don't know how we don't take this into consideration, because even if it doesn't set precedent, if now a attached sidewalk exists in the future, that's the same reason why we're making the decision today, ultimately, is because of conformity. So that, I guess, is where I'm struggling, because I read in all the documents, and what I'm hearing is that traffic wise and like drought wise, the detached sidewalk is better, is safer and more inviting for pedestrians. But and I understand how it doesn't flow with those 2 houses next door at the moment, or the 2 sidewalks next door. But I'm afraid that if we continue the straight sidewalk that's attached, then if other parts come up with a review, like, we're just going to continue to turn back to the same thing, that, like, to conform the conformity issue. So I would like to hear what other commissioners have to say on that, with that perspective.
And I'd just like to comment on that while we're on the topic before going to Commissioner Suzuki. We're looking at the conformity with the continuity with the other sidewalks as one element. The other elements that we're considering have to do with the onerousness of creating that tiered wall and the understructure of gas lines and water lines that are affected. So there's a little bit more to it than just the continuity of the sidewalks. And in terms of safety, we're not here to discuss the safety. We don't have safety reports. We don't have safety data. So we're sort of speculating at that without having our traffic engineering staff here. However, you are hearing from neighbors who walk this area saying that, that they're in favor of what the Thordals are proposing. So that to me says they probably think it's a safe enough alternative. And what they have now is basically gravel and dirt. So, it's going to be improved no matter what. Commissioner Suzuki?
I agree with the chair. I think that when it comes to other properties that happen to have attached sidewalks, I don't think that's nearly as big as a consideration as just the landscape of that specific piece of ground. That it's not like we're making this decision because, there just happens to be other attached sidewalks in the same neighborhood. We're making it, or we could make it because that plot of land is very awkward to actually have an attached sidewalk. The reason why I asked the question for this particular piece of property, how exactly would it be safer, how much safer and whatnot? Of course, we don't have data because we can't build one version of the sidewalk and then build another and then collect thousands of pedestrians' data and see what rate at which they get hurt or whatever, right? But it doesn't seem very clear to me that structurally and putting a detached sidewalk here would actually make it safer. Yeah, when it comes to, I don't think that making this an attached sidewalk will set the precedent such that if another neighbor down the road wants to create a attached sidewalk, they'll point to this project and say, well, you approved it for this one. Ultimately, I'm looking at it for this specific case. And I think that it's completely reasonable to put an attached sidewalk here.
All right, and that is exactly our job. It's to look at this particular case on its own terms. I'll throw in another comment, and this might stimulate some additional discussion. And with respect to the comments that Dr. Morley made regarding having the planting strip so that water can percolate into the ground, I would like to point out that just on Harding alone, there are many properties that have the detached parking, detached planting, detached whatever you call it, and it's been filled in with concrete or it's been filled in with rocks and concrete. And so it's no longer a percolating base. It actually has exacerbated the problem. So while the town says we're asking you to put in a detached sidewalk, the town isn't actually mandating that you plant it, as far as I can tell. So what homeowners do with that space is up to the homeowners. In the case where it's planted, it looks beautiful. It is costly in terms of water, and given the drought situation we've been in and anticipate staying in, actually question whether it makes sense to have a requirement for something to be planted when we're asking people to turn off the water. So any more discussion, having opened that box, let's do Commissioner Thomas and then Commissioner Suzuki.
Thank you, Chair, for pointing out about the taking into consideration other things. I just felt that there were multiple comments. I read all the comments that were submitted, and a lot of people had issues with people mentioned issues of safety. And so I felt like that was something, and the lack of continuity. And so I felt like I was just trying to suss out the opinions of the neighbors. And actually in all the comments that I read, people did say, I drive by this property every day. I did not actually read a lot of, I walk on this strip, which it sounds like we all have walked in this space. I used to live on Harding Avenue. I grew up there, and yeah, not having a sidewalk was stressful as a child because people definitely speed down that street. So I do appreciate it. I just wanted to have a discussion about all that because I do think that there were a lot of public comments submitted about it. And I just want to make sure that we're flushing everything out so that the findings that we make tonight are very robust and thorough with considering everything. So those were really my things. I do think that it sounds like the town needs to, I mean, I know that there are some spaces over there that have been filled in with concrete and or just rocks that don't allow for percolation. So I'm sure that the Public Works Department is like working on a lot of different ways to, and I know that the county has opportunities for subsidies and things to fill in those spaces with drought tolerant crops. But I think that I am really curious to hear about what findings we feel like we can make as a commission to grant this request, to approve this request.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Suzuki, and then Commissioner Barnett.
To me, I think the deciding factor is, do we want to give an exception to the guideline? The two factors would be, let's think about the intent of the guideline. The first intent is we want to make sure that we're making our community safe. We prioritize safety, and we also prioritize the enjoyability of the walkway for pedestrians. I understand from the principal view, like on a broad basis, having more detached sidewalks would be a good thing in the aggregate. I don't see a case for it for this one. If another commissioner who is having doubts about approving this could explain or make a case, at least for this particular plot of land, how having a detached sidewalk would make it safer or improve walkability or improve enjoyment of that property, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, I can't seem to think of a reason right now. That's the main reason why I'm currently leaning in favor.
So let me just jump in for a second before Commissioner Barnett. I'd just like to caution, we're not safety experts. We don't have safety experts with us tonight. So I think it would not be appropriate for us to make a determination based on our discussion or assumptions of safety. Commissioner Barnett.
Yes, I noted in the general plan policy CD-5.1 that provides that street standards shall recognize the existing character of the neighborhood. So in this case, with standard ST-201, I think we can construe that general plan policy to mean that there's some flexibility in that standard. I also have concerns about the interrelationship of this property with the direct neighbors. And the thought crossed my mind that we could grant the application on condition that none of the neighbors change and that it would revert to the requirement at such time as one of the direct neighbors has to comply.
All right, I'm not sure we can make that requirement on a property owner that's not part of the application, but I'll defer to staff if that is something that the commission wants to take up as part of its motion. Commissioner Thomas, did you have another question? Comment?
Yeah, I did have a question. I'm just not meaning to like harp on the safety thing, but it is explicitly written in the staff report that this is a modification because the detached sidewalk requirement provides additional pedestrian safety and allows for street trees to be planted. So I assumed that if this was written in the staff report, that we would be able to take that into account. So I just want to.
Certainly can take the staff report into account. I understood Commissioner Suzuki to ask for a discussion about safety from his fellow commissioners, and that's.
Okay.
That's okay. Have the expertise.
Thank you.
The way in there, Commissioner Hanson.
I think Commissioner Barnett had his hand up before me. I did have a comment, but if maybe he should. I think he was up before me.
I got to get my hand down. I'm working on it.
Okay.
Are you done?
Let's move to Commissioner Hanson, and then if Commissioner Barnett still has a question, we'll go back to you.
Okay, so I just want to circle back to what the objective is. So right now, in the conditions of approval, it in condition 44, it says that that they have to comply with whatever the town tells them to do. And in this particular, doesn't specifically mention the standard. And so we're at the situation where you do have to consider multiple factors. Right now, there's no sidewalk there right now, except for, I guess, a 2-foot section. In either scenario, you're going to get more of a sidewalk than there is today. So it will be safer than it is today. And then as Chair Janoff and I mentioned both earlier, you also have to consider the impact on the applicant. I feel that they have demonstrated that this is going to be extremely onerous for them to go to this town configuration, given the nature of their lot with the huge slope up from the street. And so I feel comfortable that we could change the condition to that they have to put in an attached sidewalk the full length of their property that's consistent with their neighbors on 246 and 248, instead of complying with the town standard. Because we're not asking to let them off of building a sidewalk. It's just what kind.
Commissioner Hanson, barring any other comments from commissioners, and I don't really get a sense of where we are falling out on this, but I'm inviting Commissioner Hanson to turn what you just said into a motion.
Okay, then I'm making a motion that we modify condition 44 along the lines of the applicant must construct a sidewalk, an attached sidewalk that's consistent with their neighbors at 246 and 248 and extended the full length of their property instead of the current condition with the town standards.
All right, thank you for that motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Tabano.
I second that.
Thank you. Any discussion about the motion on the table? Or concerns about the motion on the table? Commissioner Barnett.
I still have the concern about giving a permanent exemption to this homeowner when the neighbors might be subjected to the requirement. So I would again float the idea of having a conditional modification of the required condition, and that it would revert back at such time as that a directly adjacent owner is required to put in a parking strip.
Okay, two questions. Staff, would it be possible for us to make a motion that impacts neighbors, not a part of the application?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So my understanding of Mr. Barnett's comment is that the 246 and 248, I can't remember the numbers, if they came in for an architecture and site, that they may be required to do detached sidewalk. And so he's interested in having the motion modified to require some future separate improvement of this property to conform with those sidewalks, is my understanding. But Mr. Barnett, please correct me if I'm wrong.
That's exactly correct.
Okay, thank you. I misunderstood. So what you're suggesting, Commissioner Barnett, is that if the motion passes, it will be conditioned such that the homeowner would have to potentially remake the sidewalk and reintroduce the retaining wall and/or tiered retaining walls in order to conform with the town's standard.
That's correct. That the standard ST- is it 201?
201. Does the maker of the motion agree with that modification?
What I didn't hear from staff, I just heard clarification from staff in terms of understanding what the suggestion was. Is that something? It just seems pretty onerous to me that we would put that kind of condition in on an applicant about some future event that might happen or might not happen, and then after they spend all that money on building the sidewalk that they have to go back and tear it out and do something else. I mean, is that something that that's my question for staff. That's something we would do.
Yeah.
So I would agree that it would be onerous to do that. That being said, if the commission feels that that's appropriate, then they could add that condition. I don't recall, and so I would defer to Mr. Weiss or Mr. Morley, where we've had a condition like that, where we have them put in a different standard improvement in the public right of way, and then require them to modify that in the future pending other outcomes on adjacent properties.
I cannot recall another situation where we've had a conditional condition requiring someone to futuristically modify something as a result of another property's development. Items like this is particularly exactly why we have standards and why we have things that are required and standard across the board, across the properties of a same neighborhood, same type of street, so that things like this are incrementally established as applications are received and approved.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Suzuki.
I was, before the motion is voted on, what I meant by, could I hear a conversation about safety from commissioners? I understand that we're not safety experts. I meant more along the lines of, if we do have a safety expert, or if somebody specialized could attest that this would be unsafe, or just evaluate the safety with or without, at least for this particular property, I think that would make this decision a lot easier. I understand if I'm not sure if we have the resources to do this. It's just a thought that I had.
So I think I said this already, but we don't have the resources with us tonight. I'm personally not comfortable continuing this motion or this application until we have that discussion. We have a motion on the table and a suggested modification to that motion. Any comments about that? Commissioner Devona.
Yeah, I wouldn't support that modification to the original motion. I think it's there's too many hypotheticals to consider. We don't know when any applications would come in. It could be 10, 20, 30 years down the road. I think it would get lost. I think we should just focus on what's in front of us tonight and not creating heartaches in the future.
All right, thank you for that. And I would just add that I think the reason that we're making this motion is precisely to not do what the Commissioner Barnett's modification is asking us to do, which is to make that change. So back to the maker of the motion, are you comfortable or not comfortable including that?
I do not want to modify the motion, and but I did want to comment on Commissioner Suzuki's question. So we have a lot of streets, as was mentioned. There was a discussion brought up earlier about Shannon Road. Shannon Road doesn't have any sidewalks that I can think of. I drive down there every day. And it's a main thoroughfare for school. So what we're talking about here is where there's no sidewalk, we're going to be adding some. So we don't need a safety expert to tell us that it'll be safer than what there is now. And so then if we want to get into a debate about this and the planting strip and where I was going about the future, it depends on all these other neighbors or maybe the town at some point. But I'm not comfortable modifying the motion to put that onerous of a condition on the applicant after they're having to spend all the money on the sidewalk as it is.
All right, so we have a motion and a second on the table. Unless there's further discussion, I'll call the question. All right. Commissioner Hanson.
Yes.
Commissioner Tavana.
Yes.
Commissioner Barnett.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
No.
Commissioner Suzuki.
Abstain.
Vice Chair Birch. I'm reading your lips, they say yes.
Yes, sorry.
And the chair votes yes as well, so the motion carries. All right, thank you for that very thorough discussion. Are there appeal rights? Oh, do we need to make the motion with findings, or is the motion satisfactory as it stands?
The motion is sufficient. You're really just determining that the alternative sidewalk configuration is appropriate, so that's fine.
All right.
There are appeal rights. So anyone who's not satisfied with this decision of the Planning Commission can appeal it to the Town Council. There's forms online. There's a fee for filing the appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
All right, thank you for that. So we will now move on to other business, item 3. We'll start with the report from the Director of Community Development, Director Paulson.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to thank those of you who were able to attend on Monday night, the Town Council Planning Commission joint study session. I thought there were a lot of great conversations. We were able to take additional public comment. So that was very helpful. For those folks who aren't aware, we do have a draft 2040 general plan that is out for public review. And there is also a draft EIR for that draft general plan that is also out. Public comment has closed, but you can still review that to get additional information on potential impacts that might result from the general plan. The next opportunity to discuss the general plan is going to be at a community meeting we'll be having via Zoom on October 6th at 6 p.m. There's information on the general plan website, which is losgatos2040.com. And that concludes my report.
Thank you for that. And Commissioner Hanson, do you have a question?
I had a question for Director Paulson. The community meeting on the October 6th, it's going to be staff running the meeting and making the presentations and taking questions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And are members of Town Council, Planning Commission, or the former GPAC expected or encouraged to attend?
They're not expected, and obviously, if you're interested in viewing that presentation and hearing from other members of the public you might not have heard from before, then you definitely can view that meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to add on to Dr. Paulson's comments with just a brief statement. I want planning commissioners to be aware of, as a matter of procedure relating to all commission matters, but in particular to this draft general plan 2040, because it's coming up and it's contentious and a lot of people are interested in talking about it. The Planning Commission, we know, will be hearing this matter sometime in the fall. So you know that you are not permitted to talk with members of the community individually. If they have comments, you can accept them, encourage them to relate those to staff via written comment. If you are forwarded an email that has any comments or attachments, please forward those to staff so that staff can include those in any future staff reports, desk items, or addenda that come to the Planning Commission. So just a word of caution. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because there are a few of the commissioners sitting on this commissioner tonight who have been contacted directly by members of the public about the general plan. So we know that this is a matter of very high importance to a lot of people in the community, and it's only now coming to the front. They'll be eager to try to speak to as many persons as they can who they know are going to be weighing in on the future decisions. But the Planning Commission, as you know, is different. We can't take those comments. We can't enter those discussions individually. So please redirect the energies of the residents to the appropriate place, including to speak to the town council members. That they can absolutely do one-on-one. They are permitted to speak to residents. So just wanted to make sure that's clear. And if any commissioners had any questions about that, please let me know. Yes, Commissioner Suzuki.
Is that the Brown Act? I'm not sure what law that is, that we can't engage with members of the public about the general plan.
So thank you for the question. So that's actually town policy. So Planning Commission can engage with the public on any matter that will be coming before them, including the general plan. And thank you, Chair Janoff, for bringing that up. Staff actually will be preparing kind of a email response that we'll send to the commissioners so that you can send that to members of the public should you receive items on the general plan or any other item in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner Suzuki. Commissioner Hanson.
I wanted to thank our chair for bringing that up. After the meeting on Monday, I got multiple emails asking me to, since I was the chair of the GPAC, to agree to lower numbers in the general plan. And I said, you have to go back to staff. We don't have these discussions, and I don't want to get any more emails on this. So, and that's what we all have to do.
Yeah, it's really a matter of trying to remain neutral and not bringing any position or information that you've received individually the other commissioners haven't been privy to. So, we're trying, what the commission is intended to see all information that we have. All of us see the same information, so we have the same basis on which to make our determination. So that's kind of the bottom line. So, all right, thanks for that and being patient with that process. Yes, Commissioner Thomas.
I just wanted to confirm that we are still supposed to be encouraging people to come to and submit public comments, like come on October 6th and submit public comments?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Absolutely. We are
Good.
looking for public comments
Okay.
throughout this process, and we've
Good.
had a number. We expect those comments to continue right up through the desk item when this matter comes before the Planning Commission sometime this fall. So there's no limit to when those questions and comments can come in.
Okay, and then my second.
Even after the Planning Commission hears the item and makes its determination, it goes to Town Council. There's still opportunity. Yeah.
Okay. And then my other, my question also was if people have questions, especially, I mean, that's more related to those of us that were on the GPAC. Are we allowed to answer any of their questions, or do we just say you have to go to LosGatos2040.com and find it?
I would suggest, because you're a member of the Planning Commission, that you don't engage in any individual conversation about how decisions were made, the rationale.
Okay.
Those are all a matter of public record.
Yeah, so we can just refer people.
Yeah, and if they have questions,
okay,
be sure to have them submit those questions. And staff is both accumulating questions, and then they will answer those questions, and they're also taking comments. So yes, please encourage people to send those in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thanks for the question. All right, so and we can talk about this more if something comes up. You know, bring it up next commission meeting. It's going to be a few meetings before we get this the general plan on our agenda. So, you know, just keep asking questions. And when in doubt, check with staff or check with me or Vice Chair Birch if you have any questions, and we'll help guide you through. Okay, so finally we have subcommittee reports. Are there any subcommittee reports reporting at this time? I see a bunch of heads shaking. Okay, so that concludes our meeting tonight. Thank you very much for your participation and robust conversation and good decision making. This meeting is now adjourned.